take their proper seats in the proper precincts, and the chairman will give a count. Precinct 1.
10.
Precinct 1 has 10. Precinct 2.
15.
Precinct 2 is 15. Precinct 3. Precinct 3 is 11. Precinct 4. 4 is 15. Precinct 5. Precinct 5 is 11. Precinct 6. 6 is 9. Precinct 7. Precinct 7 is 12. Precinct 8. Precinct 8 has got the faithful 8. There are 91 town meeting members present. A quorum is 78. Will you please rise and join me in saluting the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm going to ask you to stand for a moment, silence, for Kenneth Kelly, who was the husband of Geraldine Kelly, who was for many years the former clerk of the Water Department. Just get everybody on the right page, and some of the things there's some preliminary motions that we have to take care of. I beg your indulgence because later on I'll be getting telephone calls from somebody somewhere saying, I didn't realize that we were doing this, and how did we vote on that? The reason I do this is for two purposes. If we are recording this and later broadcasting, it's kind of nice for those people in the viewing audience, if they're not here, to know what we are doing, even though we may not know what we are doing. We had at the third session which was our last session on May 29th, we continued and finished Budget Article 10, and with the amended amount for the school department. Then there was a motion to reconsider the selectmen's budget, which was unanimous, and it made an adjustments for collective bargaining. We then proceeded to reconsider departments 24 and 25 motion. We did not reconsider, the motions were lost. We recessed from 9:30 to 9:40 for a presentation. Oh, wait a minute. Recessed, reading the wrong thing. Recessed while the Finance Committee and accountant reconciled the final motion on the budget. Final budget motion of $76,341,448 was voted at 9:45. There was a presentation from 9:40 to 10:10 by Richard Hill on managing our debt, and 10:10 to 10:25 a response by Mr. Robert O'Regan. At 10:25 we adjourned to June 12th. I remind you, okay, Article 33 has been reserved to be done after Article 23, but there may come up sooner because Article 22, there'll be a motion on some of those things to be moved, so that may come up quite a bit sooner. There was supposed to be a presentation this evening by Mr. Tisdale of the Engineering Department regarding Article 60. He has emailed me, and as a courtesy, he'll allow the time to be used for another presentation that was more appropriate for this evening, and he will make his presentation when Article 60 comes in at the normal time. We still have tabled Article 2 reports until after Article 80. supplemental material that has been issued tonight. Includes the flood hazard maps, and the other ones already have been taken care of. And there has been another distributed tonight for Article 28A, a revised copy of the legal way for 28A to be brought on the floor. That's on that purple or violet color paper, which I don't have. I already have a copy of that. Now, one of the key requests that I made very clear, even last year, we have a lot of new people, that's fine. But I also read it off, that if you're going to make any changes, presentations, you have to have it 30 hours before the meeting convenes. I received today at least 3 calls with new information, and they were all after noon today, not yesterday. So one of the things that I'm going to make it so that you are in control, if it's necessary, I will entertain each one of these new motions, your approval to suspend the rules, because simply, if we're going to try to speed up this town meeting, I shouldn't be spending my time trying to do things that we try to prevent. The first one is, and this was referred to me before, and it's actually a proper motion to save us time and money. I'm going to recognize the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Anzavino, regarding Articles 16 to 23. 16 to 22.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, based on the actions of this body in the beginning of town meeting, we're going to ask if you would be willing to postpone Articles 16 through 22, which have the articles in there that are relative to collective bargaining, because based on the actions of this body, the board has directed the management team to continue negotiating during town meeting. So we're asking you to let us put Articles 16 to 22 off until the end of town meeting in case anything should be done by the end of the town meeting.
Could I make a suggestion?
Of course you can.
In my notes here, it would be more proper to take them until after Articles 63 to 71 are acted upon, which are capital outlay things. There's other routine things in there. It did.
If you'd like to postpone it till after Article
71.
71, that's more than satisfactory here.
You may call. What's your point of order, Mr. Smith?
I thought we decided to run them right by the numbers all the way through.
That's what the purpose of the motion to suspend the rules would be. But a motion to table is in line. So if you use the word table, Mr. Anzavino.
Certainly, Mr. Moderator. The request would be to table Article 16 to 22 until after Article 71, and it would allow the management team to continue negotiating to see if we can come to some agreement with the unions.
Mr. Hill, it's not for discussion of the content of this.
Just a quick question. Even though Articles 19 and 22 have been
that was at the moderator's request, just to keep them together. 19 and 22 are the two units that have already settled, and they will be dismissed at that time. But we're just moving it to keep
That's
the
fine.
group.
Yep.
That was
Perfect.
all.
Makes sense.
Motions to table can be done at any time. So,
And
in
if-
reference to Mr. Smith.
If you would, Mr. Moderator, the reason to do this is if we dismiss these articles now, You'll be back at a special town meeting if any contracts are settled before the end of town meeting, because the money can't be taken out of the reserves without having it placed into an article that could then allow the town accountant to disperse the funds. That's why we're asking to table them at this time, to see if we can come to any further agreements before the end of town meeting.
Is there any further discussion? Actually, you're not supposed to. Did I see? Mr. Cohen? A motion to table is not debatable. It's just an explanation. Okay? Any question? On the motion to table, Articles 16 through 22 until after Article 71 is acted upon. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Motion carried. At this time, Mr. Fitzgerald.
If the previous speaker tabled 16 through 23.
22.
I'll say correctly.
Okay.
Would Article 14 and 15 be properly tabled?
No, that is a separate issue, and it's going to be handled tonight. I recognize the chairman of the school committee, Deborah Sauvigny.
Thank you. The school committee received the great news from the Massachusetts School Building Authority that our repair articles on the West School, the Hanson School, and the Doss School have been approved for funding. And based on that information, the town meeting approved funding for the Hanson School last year. But based on that information, and because we have a long list of requirements, we would like to move on them, I am requesting that town meeting advance the school department's capital outlay articles 48 to 33 to the start of business on Monday, June 17th. Is that June 17th?
That's correct.
Is there a second?
Now, may I ask a legal question?
48 to 53.
To 53, before we go too far.
There's
I wanna
Article
add-
51 is going to be
Don't worry about
withdrawn.
what you're doing, these are all related articles.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Riley, is my end, I'm going to put a scenario up because Mr. Riley has also worked with several other towns and town meetings. We are very, I don't know whether fortunate or unfortunate to have the sessions go subsequent sessions, and many towns complete their town meeting in one night. But I know it never happen here unless it's a special. And is there not a time period after we dissolve town meeting before all our action becomes official? I believe even our charter addresses something of that sort. It's way in the back. This has more or less to deal. If you could do that one. Yeah, thank you. The reason I bring this up, it is my understanding that I realize that if we advance this to a certain night, it'll only allow you to proceed with other application
On the
process.
paperwork.
But that's all internal.
Yes.
It's nothing that you have to be concerned.
But we do have to have a vote. But we have a series of meetings, and there's a long list of requirements from the MSBA. But this would allow that to begin to move forward. Because summer's coming up, and we don't put in new windows in the school in the middle of winter.
I understand that. Okay. Mr. Riley, on my question.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, the charter does provide that after town meeting is dissolved, it's Article 11 of the charter, a vote authorizing the expenditures of any sum as an appropriation other than town charges, which I believe would mean operating budgets, should not be operative until after the expiration of 5 days. And in that time, there's an ability to have a petition signed by at least 5% of the registered voters to challenge those votes. So it's a fairly short window.
That's just a matter of information, but as a matter of the tabling, it's specific, yeah, let me start this all again. The moving to advance discussion and debate and voting on Articles 48 through 53 to June 17th. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? No. I'm going to say it's carried, unless somebody wants to spend time.
Thank you very much.
At this time, Mr. O'Regan, I'm going to ask for one request, that the presentation regarding capital outlay come prior to Article 36, because I'm offering some time on the other articles that we have, but most of those things have been moved already.
Mr. Moderator, I appreciate the opportunity for the group to make a presentation. Members of the committee are here, some of whom are not members of town meeting. Anybody mind coming back another night to?
Well, we might get to that tonight. That's the reason
It would make sense for the discussion to happen before capital items were considered.
Okay, then you understand where I'm coming from. So they're privileged to be here, know the process.
Enjoy
I know
yourselves.
you had spoken to me last week.
Relax.
But I didn't receive the email until 4 o'clock this afternoon for this request. So would you like to make a motion to allow this presentation to be done before Article 36?
Mr. Moderator, I move that the Capital and Financial Planning Advisory Committee be permitted to make a short presentation immediately prior to the presentation of Article 36.
All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? No. The motion is carried. Mr. Gito.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move that for all remaining nights of this 2013 annual town meeting, that the meetings be gavelled to order at 7:15 and that no new business be introduced after 10:45. The reason for this, I don't know how many of you went on the Snyder's Stoughton or the Patch, but we could gain about 3/4 of an hour a night and maybe save ourselves some precious time after the beginning of summer, not coming here. The 24th, 26th, and 27th are the first full week of summertime, I believe, and I'd like to see us move along.
We also have to complete that town meeting no later than June 27th by state statute, so your motion is very proper. At least gives us some leeway. All those in favor of Mr. Gito's motion? No. All those opposed? No. The motion carries. Did somebody else have any? Now, I just want to bring up a comment. Why Mr. Tisdale called me today, well, I saw him last Friday, and I was very shocked to find that there is a public hearing being conducted at this time on the Central Street Harrison Boulevard Bottleneck Study Workshop, which has to do with Article 60 of the town warrant, being conducted by the Old Colony Planning Council. I don't know where the communications went wrong on this, or whether nobody checked anything. However, I am going to, I know the executive director of the Old Colony Planning Council, and I'm going to ask that this be rescheduled at another time, because our, the engineer, Mr. Tisdale, was working with that program, and I feel it's unfortunate that they make things that our town meeting dates were well posted well in advance, and somewhere along the line that should have been checked. So I really take objection to a meeting of this sort, which is town meeting business, being scheduled at the same time. It is another agency, but we are a member of that agency as the town of Stoughton, and therefore, and we pay for their services. So that's the end of my soapbox. At this time, I will recognize Town Manager for Article 11.
Mr. Moderator, I move that the town vote to transfer from available funds in the Treasury, if any, a sufficient sum of money to implement fiscal year 2013 departmental budgets, or fund previously approved articles, or take any other action relative thereto.
Now, I have a good question. Do you have a dollar amount?
No, I do not. I think this will be actually a motion to dismiss.
Well, I don't, I'm going to say that your motion is out of order, because there was nothing given to us. Ms. Walsh?
Cynthia Walsh, Precinct 2, move dismissal.
On the motion to dismiss, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. The motion to dismiss carries. And this is 6:12. 8. That's a 1-minute article. Article 12, ID 17, to accept and contract for funds for town roads. Mr. Hill.
That the Board of Selectmen be authorized to accept and enter into contracts for the expenditure of any funds allocated or to be allocated by the Commonwealth for the construction, reconstruction, and improvements of town roads.
Is there any discussion on this? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the motion carries. Article 13, ID 18, to apply for and accept federal and state funding. Mr. Hill.
That the Board of Selectmen be authorized to apply for and accept any federal and/or state funding which may be available to the town.
Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Now, I'm going to beg your indulgence. Articles 14 and 15 have several major issues. However, for the purposes of expediting this meeting, and the Human Resources Director, Mr. Kelly, has asked to make a presentation regarding Articles 14 and 15 in what I call a recess session. A recess session is you're sitting here, There's a presentation, and during this session, there'll be no votes taken, there'll be no amendments to any specific details in any article. This is a presentation on what is in Articles 14 and 15, and then I will explain the other procedure. Mr. Collins.
How long is this going to take, sir?
I'll have to ask the presenter. About 10 minutes at most?
No, about 15, I hope, Mr. Moderator.
All right, we will, I think it'll answer a lot of questions that we cannot normally do in a full session. So we are in a recess session, and that is for this purpose.
Excuse me, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Fallon,
Could, by any chance, we finally make it easy enough for us and we slide the table on the side so everybody can see the...
this one?
Yes.
Can they bring? Oh, this thing?
Is any wires to it? That's what I always do at work.
What do you think this is? Alex's?
It hurts us over there. We can't see it.
Hold it.
So I was just going to put it to the side. Is that able to be seen?
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
I'm going to ask you to move over a little bit. I will get out of the way of the podium.
I did check.
Mr. Moderator, and through you to the town meeting, thank you for the opportunity to address you on these issues. As you know, because it was an answer to the FinCom audit of 2010, this town has endeavored to modernize their HR structure, policies, procedures, and the offices that serve it. The position of HR Director was created by this town meeting. A modern HR payroll system was installed, and last December, to protect the town from litigation and modernize the town, basic personnel policies were adopted by the Board of Selectmen. What needs to be done to follow up on the audit that was done in 2010 is we need to build a human resources structure. We need to create basic personnel file system, establish an HR procedures manual, review and redraft job descriptions, construct a performance review system, draft an employee handbook, and provide for succession planning and a training program. Stoughton in 2012 had 7 different salary grids. The grades and steps were not uniform, and this is on the town side. This does not concern the schools. Over 80% of the town employees were at max step. One unit had an automatic reclassification, not based on changes in job duties, excuse me, and as such had no maximum. Contracts were settled retroactively, sometimes 2 and 3 years. There were no equity in raises, no equity in wages to job classification, and no equity in wages to job duties. In 2013, we've settled 2 contracts, the library and superior officers. These contracts were settled proactively before the others ran out. We incorporated a town wage scale. The steps are uniform. There is equity in raises. We incorporated a town management rights clause. We referenced a personnel bylaw in the contracts. We eliminated unit-wide job-based stipends. And we eliminated the program of super longevity, which gave 5% on 3 years to various employees just because they were the senior employee in the bargaining unit. So they get an extra 5% for 3 years for no other reason than they were the senior member. This shows the various ways things were done prior to 2013. This shows what we're endeavoring to do this year and in the future. You look at the annual town revenue increases through the years, as high as 5%, as low as 0.5%. You look at the average wage expenditure, the total wage expenditures, the total wage increases for the town, the total wage increases for the school. The average over the number of years is approximately 2.5%. However, look at the swing. You cannot predict a budget with that much swing. It is very definitely because you're settling your contracts so retroactively, where in 1 year you will have a large wage expenditure and in other years a small wage expenditure. This is a total wage expenditure, as you can see. It looks like an oscilloscope. Town wage expenditure change, same thing. Total versus the town. When you budget for personnel from fiscal year 2004 to 2008, the COLA increases for the contracts, COLA being cost of living adjustment, are listed. The average was 1.9. For fiscal year 2009 to 12, it was 1.88 average. However, when you add the cost of living increases to the step increases included in the union contracts, with the step range, depending on the contract, between 3% to 8%. The steps and COLA range is 4 to 11% per year. The average annual revenue increase is 3 to 4% a year. Look at the difference. That does not include benefits. That just includes raises. Steps plus COLA equal a disaster in budgeting. The new administration through the Board of Selectmen has established some goals. Financial control, standardize the personnel procedure, modernize collective bargaining, and improve labor relations. We're proposing a town personnel bylaw that is voted by the town meeting. It allows us to establish a town-wide compensation and classification plan. It allows us to establish uniform working conditions, uniform fringe benefits, and establish basic town-wide HR procedures. Within a bylaw, the typical bylaw, these are the sections of a typical personnel bylaw. Many towns in the area have a personnel bylaw. What you have to understand, and it's not what has been put out through anecdotal things lately, it applies to union and non-union staff. The union staff, however, it applies to them once it's negotiated. It doesn't apply to them if it's not negotiated. General inclusion by reference in the collective bargaining agreements. The two agreements we've settled have it that way. It includes a one town-wide job classification and compensation plan that is based on scientific data and analysis. It standardizes holiday, FMLA, sick leave, paid leave, and vacation allotments across the town so that all employees have the same fringe benefits. And it establishes a grievance appeal procedure for the non-union employees. The town-wide classification and compensation plan, by directive of the Board of Selectmen, no employee's pay will be decreased. Every employee will be held harmless. However, there will be a comprehensive position grade study. Job classification rating plan is included. We use the MMPA, which is the Mass Municipal Personnel Association, a subgroup of the MMA, benchmark study comparison. It's a uniform plan with salary ranges for job equals the market value of the job. There's standard steps and differences between the steps, standard grades and differences between the grades. And if there is going to be steps versus COLA that changes the grid, it will be done through an annual town meeting vote. The ratings are based on departmental needs and the grade structure. You analyze the job using certain rating factors. You use a point value system for each factor. You compile the points, set the job grade, job points to grade range. You review the results with management. These are the rating factors: education, experience, accountability, how many people are working for you, who you are accountable to, the judgment necessary to do the job, the complexity of the job, the supervision required, contact with the public, work environment. Are you working in a dangerous environment? Are you working in an environment that has OSHA concerns? Physical demands, motor skills, risks. Police officers, firefighters have certain risks that office workers do not. Confidentiality requirements, supervisory responsibility, and supervision exercised. To give you an example, the black towns, starting with Canton, would be towns right now that we're using as comparable towns. We're looking at population, per capita income, revenue, state aid, expenditures, and distance from Stoughton. To give you a couple examples of the way this rating system works. Looking at past dates, because I'm not giving you this year's publication, in case we have to go into negotiations and use it, I do not want to put my cards on the table right away, because I know there are people I'm bargaining with sitting in the back. But if you look for a fire lieutenant, and you look at what the other towns pay, and then you look at what Stoughton pays, we're fairly well in the range. For a police officer, you look at what a police officer earns in various towns, and we are somewhat in the range. For a heavy equipment DPW operator, you look at what other towns pay, and we are in the range. That's how we do the study. We not only grade the job individually, we look at the comparability, and that's how you place it in this grid. Quick enough, Mr. Moderator?
That's pretty good. It was exactly 15 minutes. Are there any basic questions on the presentation? Mr. Cohen. Please rise and
how does this perceive to management? We're talking about the employees. What about management?
Other than the 3 managers that have individual employment contracts, all other managers are studied, classified, and put in the grid.
Mr. Moderator, there's individuals in this town meeting that in management positions that went from $50,000 to $80,000. Is that the proper way we do things? And if you want the name, I'd only be happy to tell you who it is. And that's not only the first time. If we're going to treat people fair, let's treat everyone fair. They come in on a contract, they work for the people, but to give someone a $30,000 raise in a year is ridiculous.
Now, before we go too far in this discussion, individual dollar amounts, fine for an example, but we're not allowed to make any amendments or anything, but general information, fine. Any other general questions? Mr. Coleman.
Eric Coleman, Precinct 5. Towards the beginning of the presentation, you had something about a personnel bylaw, and then, if I read it correctly, it is negotiable with the union. This bylaw is negotiable with the union. Am I mistaken?
Under state law, collective bargaining agreements trump personnel bylaw. If the collective bargaining agreement is silent, then the personnel bylaw applies. If the collective bargaining agreement is not silent on a particular issue, then the collective bargaining agreement applies.
So the collective bargaining would supersede what we have as a bylaw, and the bylaw would not change. The bylaw itself would not change.
Correct.
Thank you.
What you're looking at is when you put the personnel policies, or the selectmen did, in place, those were the basic bricks in a wall that you have to put in place, a lot of them by federal law. It's the affirmative action policy, it's a sexual harassment policy, it's a drug-free workplace policy. The next row is the personnel bylaw. It establishes a personnel HR structure that is a base. Above that comes the collective bargaining agreements.
Mr. Coleman.
Do we anywhere have a copy of this personnel bylaw that we're going to be voting on?
It's
It was in your, printed in your,
in
Thank
the
you.
book. It was published with the book.
Mr. DeFelice.
At the beginning of the presentation, I think it said that this was going to apply to union and non-union personnel.
It applies to non-union personnel. It applies to union, for the 2 bargaining units that have settled. It applies because they have referenced it in the collective bargaining agreements. We are right now negotiating with the other bargaining units. anything that is not addressed in the collective bargaining agreement, then the personnel bylaw applies.
I'd like to kind of reiterate what a previous speaker said. I think one of the problems I've seen over the more recent years is that we bring certain people in, usually department heads, maybe a town manager, people at the top of management, and I agree with the previous speaker, that's what seems to be out of control in the town. It doesn't seem that I don't see that there's a big problem elsewhere, although it's good to get up to date and get into the new century so that we're like everybody else. But I don't see anything in here that controls huge increases to certain people or bringing people in off the street at, some ridiculous salaries. How do you control that? How are we controlling the people at the top?
The personnel bylaw is not designed to control salaries or wages. That goes into the determination of the wage and salary classification plan and compensation plan. This allows you to set all of the fringe benefits such as holidays, vacation time, sick time, that type of thing, town-wide for all employees, so that you cannot make a special deal and give someone like 8 weeks vacation coming in. This establishes by bylaw the base. This establishes all of the various personnel rights and privileges and perks, so to speak, for all the way for every town employee. The only town employees that it might be better for would be the ones in the union contracts.
I still don't seem satisfied with an answer as to how we're going to control these huge salary swings. People that get maybe, I think in your charts, over time, 1 to 5%. And then we see people getting $30,000 and $40,000, $50,000 raises granted by either the Board of Selectmen or your school committee. I think that's where we should be trying to do some control. I mean, it's fine to do what you're saying, but, where the big money is, we don't seem to be addressing it. I'm not happy with that.
Article 15 establishes a town-wide salary grid and places the jobs within the grid. And the only way that grid can be changed is to come to town meeting for a vote. So that would address that part of it. Personnel bylaw is Article 14. That's more Article 15. But I understand what you're saying. Once you set up the grid and you set up the classification where you're going to put the jobs in the grid, the only way you can move that is to reclassify a job based on scientific study and come to town meeting for ratification.
Let's say that the town in general is giving their employees, let's just take a 2% raise, okay? Now, can we assume that that would also apply to anybody in management? Would it apply to the town manager, to all the department heads? Would they also get a 2%? Are we going to look at some people getting 2% and some getting 5 and 10%?
If this is adopted, and it's adopted town-wide through the union contracts, as well as the non-union personnel, and the town meeting agrees with me that steps and cost of living together are financial suicide, and let's say you're giving steps, that would mean that everyone would, on the town side, this does not apply to the schools, by law it cannot, everything on the town side would get a 2.5% raise across the board. No one would get a 2% and someone else get a 5%.
So who's going to control
There
this?
are only 3 employees that would not be under this. The 3 that are under the individual employment contracts.
So it seems that the proposal is going to control the town employees on the municipal side. Who's going to control what's going on down the hallway here?
The school committee has to, that we cannot control the school. Under statute, state law, we are not allowed to have input into that.
Thank you.
Mr. Barry Crimmins.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Barry Crimmins, Precinct 4. Question for you, Mr. Moderator. Are we discussing both Articles 14 and 15 under this suspension?
On the recess session,
On the recess
yes.
session? Okay,
But we're
thank
not to address specific parts of either article. It's the general concept.
Okay, thank you. My questions are of a more general nature. If I heard correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, perhaps Mr. Kelly, if both the personnel bylaw and the classification plan were to be adopted by town meeting, they would still need to be ratified and approved by the various unions, correct?
They would have to be incorporated into the collective bargaining agreements we're negotiating.
Okay.
They've been incorporated into the 2 that we've finished.
Okay. So I guess my comment, and I guess in keeping with the moderator's admonition, does not go to the merits or lack thereof of the 2 particular articles, but it seems to me we seem to be putting the cart before the horse. It would seem to me more logical and appropriate to see if the, notwithstanding that I believe you said the 2 that have already approved it by reference in their collective bargaining agreements, to wait to see if the others adopt this, and then, and perhaps that may happen before this annual town meeting dissolves, if we're so lucky. But if that were to occur, then to have these articles presented to town meeting for approval. It seems to me it's analogous to what we have done in all the years that I've been a town meeting member, when an individual union approves a memorandum of agreement, and then that memorandum of agreement is presented to town meeting for approval. We don't approve the memorandum of agreement prior to the bargaining unit approving it. So I guess I'd like, from my...
Actually, technically, you do not approve the memorandum of agreement. You approve the funding of the memorandum of agreement.
I stand corrected.
And the memorandum of agreement could have been implemented without the funding, and it would just mean that there would be layoffs.
Okay. So I guess my question through you, Mr. Moderator, to the Human Resources Director is, what is the benefit in town meeting taking action on these 2 articles prior to the collective bargaining units doing so?
The benefit is, first of all, it applies to all non-union workers. It applies to all union that have settled. And beyond that, not to fall into a trap and thus commit an unfair labor practice by making a further statement and have the town subject to litigation, I will have to stop there.
And I guess that sort of underscores my point. I've heard you now say on more than one occasion that you're somewhat hamstrung by concerns of unfair labor practices and making statements that would violate that. And I guess that goes to my point. We seem to be dancing around an issue here about whether or not these two articles are going to be approved by the particular bargaining units, and we're concerned about making statements about them prior to that bargaining process occurring, which again goes back to my main concern and my main question about these articles, which is, why aren't we waiting until we see if, in fact, the bargaining units approve them first? They may approve them in whole, they may approve them in part, they may reject them in their entirety, in which case it would seem to me what we have in front of us this evening may not be necessarily what ends up getting adopted, which would have to come back to us anyway. So
That's not true, because you have to remember the town always has the power not to adopt the union's position.
Well, I understand that. I guess it begs the question. My preposition is...
It benefits the town.
My preposition is that there is going to be some agreement, but what I learned as a definition of the word agreement is both sides agreeing to something. And so if we get to that illustrious point where both sides have agreed, that agreement may not be entirely the same as what we have in front of us. So I guess...
If the town would come to what you're saying, and as the former chair of the State Labor Board, I know where I cannot tread, and I do know that I can't make a statement of what the town will do in negotiations, but the approval by town meeting of these two articles will benefit the town.
They may, and there may be plenty of time for that to happen. My only question, and I will now say that it's somewhat rhetorical, is do we need to do it now, or do we wait until either the end of this town meeting or perhaps to a special town meeting that may get called in the fall? Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Morton and Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dick Fitzgerald, Precinct 3. I have a general question, I guess, to ask, and probably just give a little description of what happens with town meeting. The very first committee that meets at town meeting or for town meeting is the Rules Committee. And they meet on the second Monday. I'll stand corrected, Mr. Moderator. Second Monday?
If you're addressing...
When does the Rules Committee meet?
I haven't addressed on that regarding the two articles. The Rules Committee meeting, but it will be discussed later, but ask your question and then I'll tell you whether this is the time.
I don't need to, I just want to make a point. As chairman of Precinct 3 for a number of years, I sat on the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee, basically, ladies and gentlemen, gets a piece of paper, a couple of pieces of paper, and it lists all the articles, 1 through whatever, and it gives a description as to what sitting committees should indeed hear the article. And the Rules Committee assigns the articles to the committees. As you can see on page 49, Municipal Regulations Committee and Municipal Operations Committee.
Okay, Mr. Fitzgerald, when it comes to Articles 14 and 15, I am addressing that issue here from the podium. That's where my serious concerns are. So,
well, can I address my serious concern?
I believe your concerns are the same as mine.
Well, is it proper for me to address my concerns now to my fellow members?
Well,
I stood
I'm
before
gonna
them,
allow you-
and I'd like to at least point something out.
you'll put it up, and then
Okay, let's put it out.
and I'll give you the response.
Let me put it out. Ladies and gentlemen, on page 49, read the article on the personnel bylaw, fifth line down, it says, the bylaw also, fourth line down, bylaw also grants the town legal authority to create and manage a town-wide comprehensive job classification and compensation plan. I can tell you that the Rules Committee didn't receive all of this article. You go to your book and you look on page 173. That's where the description of 15 pages in length of Article 14 is. And approximately halfway down the page, you'll read that, give everybody time to get to page 173. In the second paragraph, no amendment shall be considered or voted on by town meeting unless the proposed amendment has first been considered by the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. We sat here and we've had a presentation. We have no idea of cost. We're being told it's going to save money. But I'm sure there's a cost behind saving money. I don't understand why this wasn't, well, let me back that up. I defend the Rules Committee because I sat on it. If they're not given the proper information, and they can only be given proper information that's given to the individual who's in charge of the Rules Committee, if that individual can't get the proper information, then they don't know where to assign this to be heard. I sat over there when a matrix was designed to upgrade personnel in the town of Stoughton in 1997. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, and several of you are still here, that we had to go before the Finance Committee. And we got beat up pretty good. One member of the Finance Committee telling me in this floor, in this room, that he used his Radio Shack calculator and the numbers don't add up. I don't forget things like that. This, I believe, should have been heard by the Finance Committee, but it couldn't have been assigned to him because there wasn't enough information given out to properly have this heard. Something doesn't seem to be correct. Mr. Moderator, we're still on the heard and recess session, so anything else can come up after you remove that session?
Yes, and in fact, those very issues were going to be addressed by this chair, because those were my concerns and why we're following the procedure we're doing, so.
And now, if somebody gets up in recess session, can they come back in regular session and speak?
Well, right now, this is an open forum.
I know it's open now.
And this doesn't, this is nothing, this is for general information.
Correct.
So when we get on the individual articles, then I will explain the scope that we can do there.
Oh, I could be back.
Yeah?
Thank you very much.
Mr. Morton. Please come down here.
I think I'm going to
I
say the same thing
recognize
he's going to
Mr.
say.
Moore. If this is to interrupt the speaker or just,
No, sir. As part of Municipal Operations Committee, as chairman, this was a public meeting. It was a joint meeting with the Regulations Committee. I will say, nobody showed up. So there was an opportunity to speak on this in front of a public hearing. There was also a very good chance to ask questions. It was wide open. We had a very good discussion with the human resource. Nobody interrupted us. Thank you.
John
Mr.
Morton,
Moore.
Precinct 3.
This is going to go on forever. I really don't understand this process. Everybody who's already spoken is now going to get up and come back and speak again on the article. I would like us to begin to address the article. In terms of concept, I think the notion of a personnel bylaw is an excellent concept. I think we have a Board of Selectmen that's doing its job. I think we have a town manager that's doing its job. I think we have a human resource director that's doing their job. I think the town benefits from having this. Whether it gets incorporated into the bylaw, the collective bargaining agreements, all of them or not, is another question. The fact that this town meeting endorses it, the fact that it is on the books, the fact that it's already into collective bargaining, correct me if I'm wrong, is a very strong statement as to what this town desires in terms of uniformity across the law, all of the departments, fair treatment of the employees in terms of compensation, and fair treatment of the taxpayers in terms of double dipping and COLAs and step raises and so on, which have the impact of doubling or tripling the annual raises that we think we're giving, because they often don't include notions of the step raises and the COLAs and so on. I think we've paid. We've elected our selectmen, we've asked them to do this job, we've hired a human resource director, and we ought to get on with now letting them do their job and congratulate them for the effort. And I guess I'd like to speak when it comes time to talk about the article, but I'll not if other people cover what I would like to say. I'd like to go into active session so we can move this town meeting along.
Mr. Scardino. Okay. Mr. Smith?
Paul Smith, Precinct 7. I have questions about the way that you're going to set the step raises. Nobody's going to take a cut and pay. So you will use the existing pay rate to set your scale.
We would move, what we've done with the collective bargaining agreements that we've settled, and the non-union employees, in most cases, if there was an appropriate grade, we move them into the next closest step.
So if somebody is making something way out of range at this point, they won't take a cut and pay. They will wait until the range catches up to them.
They will be redlined.
Okay. You mentioned OSHA. Does OSHA really apply to employees of the town?
No, but
okay.
But
we're exempt.
what we're doing is we're taking similar things to make basic employee rights.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
That being, I feel that nobody else has got basic question, I'm going to declare that this recess session has closed at 8:46. Now comes really all the little things in the questions. And please bear with me. I think some of these questions have been directed before. However, because of what we have here, before I allow a motion for either article or both articles, either one, the major issue that we have had is what the previous speaker brought up, is conformance to Charter Article 7, Section 714, and the Town Bylaws, Chapter 47, Conduct of Public Hearings and Numbering of Warrant Articles, and Chapter 293, Conduct of Public Hearings. These bylaws work in conjunction with a chartering requirement that all articles in the warrant must be referred to the Rules Committee to at least one appropriate standing committee for public hearing and a standing committee report on the article. Chapter 47 describes the timeliness of the process of closing the warrant, the necessary information required to be included within each warrant article, so the petitioners can be properly notified of the public hearings and what is to be conducted at a public hearing. Further, the finance and all standing committees must not less than 14 days before the convening of town meeting deliver to the town meeting representatives those required reports. These are both general bylaws, and in order for the public hearings to be held, substantive text of all bylaws must be in the warrant at the time it is turned over to the Rules Committee. While a warrant is in the drafting process, it is reasonable for the selectman and its designated agent to allow placeholder articles with as little as a title for reference and identification purposes only. The Rules Committee and the Standing Committee members cannot and are not mind readers of the petitioner, and they have no obligation to fill in the blanks. In order to hold a public hearing and have a basis for report and recommendations to go before the voters. This issue was clearly resolved in April 1975, when the committee reports were not delivered 14 days in advance of the town meeting, and that the town meeting sessions are not the time to present for the first time any substantive text or financial data to be voted that was not in a warrant, not having received any report from a standing committee. In other words, you can't deliver a report the same day we're going to vote on it, or call this a public hearing. As moderator, I have allowed advisory reports to offer or recommend amendments or substitute motions under the consent to alter a warrant article. That is a very important phrase in an article. It says, or take any other action relative thereto. That is consistent with the general laws of both town and state posting notifications to voters, which thereby allow them to understand what they will be voting. For Article 14, the entire text of Article 14 was not in the warrant given to the Rules Committee on February 7. When the warrant was reissued after the ATM date changed on March 11, still only a placeholder description was published in the warrant. And thus, when the respective standing committees did not have substantive text available at the public hearings, the complete text of the personnel bylaw, which is Article 14, without the general code numbering and captioning, which is a service that we pay for, was issued to members of the Municipal Operations and Municipal Regulations Committee at the public hearings on March 20 and April 3. The committee members were given a general scope presentation at the April 3rd hearing. As a previous speaker noted, the March 20th meeting failed to have a quorum, and part of this had to do with advertising schedules and a few other problems. However, the meetings were rescheduled. The entire text of Article 14 Personnel Bylaw was published in the Finance Committee report and complies with the distribution of the warrant. Thus this, let me go back. The entire text was published in the Finance Committee report on pages 173 and 188. Thus, this publication of the article text does comply with the distribution of the warrant in the state statute. And in this chair's opinion, this late publication does not comply with the intent of our local bylaws and charter. However, if this issue is to be challenged, then I will ask for a motion for a suspension of the rules to offer this solution, subject to town council's interpretation of one of these things from town meeting time, section 54, which I do have a response, and I will read it and then I'll mention his response. This is from town meeting time. A bylaw that requires the Finance Committee to make recommendations on money articles is considered directory. But a bylaw that provides that no appropriation may be made or a bylaw adopted, or a bylaw adopted unless the Finance Committee has made a recommendation is more than a mere rule of procedure. So also, a bylaw that prohibits a change in a personnel plan without a recommendation of the Personnel Board is more than merely procedural. Because of the structure of the Stoughton RTM, any reference to a Finance Committee, now this is now my statement, not a quotation. Because of the structure of the Stoughton RTM, any reference to a Finance Committee will properly apply to the appropriate town meeting standing committees named in the charter. We do not have a Personnel Board, but this is similar to the zoning bylaws and planning board relationship, which requires a recommendation from the planning board for all zoning changes. Town council was asked, who is the Personnel Board? The town manager, the Board of Selectmen, and his response to that was simply this: we do not have a Personnel Board in this town, and but for the purposes, we can still adopt a personnel bylaw. In doing things in a package, now I'll address Article 15. As with Article 14, there was no text printed in the warrant, nor in the Finance Committee report. The compensation plan that was shown at the public hearing on April 3rd was an example from another town. This first public appearance of the details of this bylaw and the motion for Article 15 was distributed to town meeting members on the opening session of the annual town meeting, May 20th, and at the subsequent session on May 22nd. The general laws require distribution of the warrant with substantive information be in the hands of the voters, that is, in this case, town meeting members, a minimum of 1 week before town meeting, while the charter says 2 weeks. 2 weeks has now passed, as of tonight, before this article is to be brought on the floor of town meeting. Town meeting members have had ample time to review the bylaw. However, the municipal regulations and the municipal operations committees did not have a recommendation motion, nor did it have a public hearing on this specific compensation plan and bylaw. That does not comply with the charter. It was explained to the Finance Committee in executive session that the content of such a classification plan was confidential while collective bargaining contracts were being negotiated. So now we have a paradoxical situation. However, the moderator opines that any bylaw or plan that has to be voted by the town meeting ceases to be confidential and is in the public domain. And further, town meeting cannot vote on a placeholder article by calling the entire text of a bylaw an amendment or substitute motion. Whatever happens at this point, the moderator cannot certify compliance with the statutes, charters, and bylaws for Article 15. Now the question comes, where do we go from here? And this is why I recommended we handle this recess session, so that we could air all of this out. And we have done that. The town moderator will explain, as I have, what the situation of these two articles. Now, there's one other thing that I want to bear in mind, that none of the warrant articles, neither of these warrant articles, had the clause or take any other action relative thereto. So, at this time, I'm going to ask the requesting petitioner, Mr. Kelly, whether it was his intention to have both of these articles voted without amendments or any, just exactly as it was posted in the warrant. Please address that at the microphone for the record.
Mr. Moderator, on both these articles, the request is to have them approved as presented.
Okay, that clears one understanding that I wanted to make clear to this, to the town meeting. In both of these cases, we're adopting a general bylaw, which only requires a majority vote. However, if there's discussion, it's always as wise to ask for standing count. And as far as this goes, in either case, I throw this situation to you, the town meeting members, because it is important, it is something that was requested by town meeting several years ago and town boards to handle this issue and the serious complications that we have with let's say I'm not going to call it secrecy, but the bargaining and good faith issues that complicate complying with every part of our bylaws and our charter, and whether these would be tested by further objection later. I'm going to, for each one of these articles, ask the town meeting if it wishes to suspend the rules, to vote on these articles and have further discussion in the details, with the understanding there will be no motions to make an amendment, because first of all, it hasn't been in writing, but the other is the fact the intention was not to have it amended. It will be up or down vote. Motion to suspend is a 2/3 vote. And from that point on, if you wish to have this proceed, it is not my job to tell you not to vote on these things. You understand that some of your rights as a town meeting member were not available to you, but you're being asked to make a judgment on what is being presented, and many of the things have been available to you, and that allows us to make further discussion and why some of this presentation was done in the manner it was. So at this stage, for Article 14, which is the adoption of a personnel bylaw, the motion I will need someplace in all this paperwork. When are we going to have a paperless town meeting?
Motion's in the book.
Mr. Gito. You may. We are suspending the fact that we have rules in our charter and our town bylaws pertinent to how and what manner in which town meeting is to receive, conduct public hearings, and I addressed those at the beginning.
So it's the procedure that led up to these things.
Right.
It's not something that we're suspending.
It's not our own rule of the, which is very serious in the sense that the reason we have these rules, there is intent, and one of the, in the creation of our town charter and the subsequent bylaws was to hear the principle that the town meeting members should be accorded adequate information about what is coming before them, and not to be asked to blindly vote on things. And I respect very much the fact that every one of us involved in the town meeting are very considerate of all these situations. So I need to find the right piece of paper.
Mr. Moderator, while you're looking for that piece of paper, if I might, just address a comment that you had made, that town meeting members, should have the information. And I just want to point out that they did have the information, because when the books were delivered, the personnel bylaw is in this book, and it was there for them to read and to comprehend and look through it, and could ask questions if they have them, because they had it since 2 weeks before town meeting. So I just wanted to point out that this bylaw was given to them in its entirety when the book came out.
I did mention it in my comments. If Article 14, there was specific copy. However, that was not available prior to the public hearings. So half of the compliance is there, and the other half is not. And as far as the compensation plan, while we are not free to change it, we have the right to see it, and that plan was only delivered to us 2 weeks ago.
Correct. So
we are not totally following those bylaws, and there are circumstances, as was pointed out, that we cannot always do that. I have a question of my comments. Mr. Crimmins.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. A point of information on a comment that the moderator just made. If this body were to vote to suspend the rules to allow a discussion and/or vote to go forward, did I understand you to say that we, town meeting, would not be allowed to offer any amendments, but could only vote on the articles up or down? Is that correct?
As the motion is worded, the motion happens to be the entire text of both.
How, if I may, Mr. Moderator, how is it that we lose that right?
Because there was no authorization to make any amendment cited in the warrant article itself, which is that authorizing clause, or take any other action relative thereto. And we have had a practice since long before I got on the scene of making sure when and when not that phrase is used.
So the absence of that phrase precludes us from making any amendments, but we can ask questions.
Especially what I'm going to say, substantive amendments. If you see a typo, that's That's not really an amendment, it's a correction.
Okay, that, again, to me seems a bit of form over substance, that by the failure of that phrase to occur in the body of the article, that we as town meeting members lose our right to offer amendments that we may think are appropriate. But again, I'll defer to the moderator.
You'll have no choice. Now, at this point, I'm going to, if someone, I'd even ask the Finance Committee Chairman if he wishes to make the motion to suspend the rules to allow us to discuss, put Article 14 on the floor.
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules so we can discuss Article 14.
And discuss and vote on it.
Discuss and vote on
All
Article
right. Now,
14.
remember, this vote, if you want me, if it's not unanimous, I will take a standing count for the record because it requires a 2/3 vote. And this is only to let us proceed further, or let you to proceed further. All those in favor of suspending the rules for Article 14, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. I'm going to ask for a standing count. All those in favor, please rise. Precinct 1. Precinct 1 is 8. Precinct 2. 8. Precinct 2 is 8. Precinct 3. Precinct 3 is 12. Precinct 4. Precinct 4 is 15. Precinct 5. Precinct 5 is 8. Precinct 6. Precinct 6 is 5. Precinct 7. Precinct 7 is 10. Precinct 8. Precinct 8 is 7. All those opposed, please rise. Precinct 1. 7. Precinct 1 is 7. Precinct 2. 7. Precinct 2 is 7. Precinct 3. 3. Precinct 3 is 3. Precinct 4. 2. Precinct 4 is 2. Precinct 5. 3. Precinct 5 is 3. Precinct 6. 5. Precinct 6 is 5. Precinct 7. 4. Precinct 7 is 4. Precinct 8. Precinct 8 is 1. What do you have?
73 to 32.
73 to 32. That is the 73 yes, 32 no. 2 times 32 is 64. The motion carries. The rules have been suspended. Article 14 is on the floor. And at this time, I will yield to the Municipal Regulations Committee member, chairman. If not, I will allow the town manager to put this on, or the chairman of the Board of Selectmen. You prefer to put it on, Mr. Angelini?
I'm ready to do so right now.
And it's very simple.
On Article 14, I move the town vote to amend the town code by adopting the personnel bylaw as printed in the appendix to this warrant, and that would be on pages 173 to 188.
Second. Now, at this time, if there is any further discussion specifically on the content of the personnel bylaw, Mr. Kelly?
Are you all set, Jamie? If I can, Mr. Moderator, just to remind people that 2 of our unions have already accepted this, and this would also apply to all the non-union, non-bargaining unit members that work for the municipal side. It's, as Mr. Kelly had indicated, This would be something that would apply across all municipal employees. And the method of going before town meeting, quite simply, was to get town meetings backing on this, which provides an extra layer of comfort, in my opinion, for the employees that would be governed by this, because the changes need to come back to town meeting to change this. It would not be set as a policy of the board, which it could be, and just at the whim of the board whether it wants to change things or not. So we really felt it was best to bring it to the body here and have them approve it and give those employees that extra comfort level that it's this body that would have to make the changes to it. So I just want to bring that to your attention, and I certainly hope you will consider this and vote in favor of this. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, to any questions from the town meeting members? I don't see any. You're fine. Comment. Okay, my apologies. Actually, somebody is doing what we expect. Mr. Scardino.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Joe Scardino, Precinct 1. I want to start off by saying that most of you know the Constitution provides for equal protection under the law. The key operative word here is law. Without law, there can't be any equal protection. The substance of this bylaw provides the kind of backbone necessary to guarantee equal employment among all employees. I've read the bylaw. I draft them for a living. There's nothing unusual in there. In fact, I think it's more than fair. The handbooks that I draft don't provide for the level of progressive discipline, appeal rights, and even after a violation is found to be the case, a discipline, if the employee is found not to have any further negative performance, that disappears from the file after 6 months. I don't know about you, but that work for private sector employers, but and that's what I draft handbooks for. They don't have policies quite like this. They're very, very generous. They even provide for appeal rights through the Board of Selectmen. So if you don't get along with your supervisor, you don't get along with your department head, you don't get along with the town manager, you still have an opportunity to have your case heard by the Board of Selectmen. These rules will expedite the resolution and prevent problems of labor relations, will minimize litigation and arbitration, costly drains on the budget, on legal expenses, as well as time lost from performance of duties. Going back to the remarks, equal protection, providing regularity and uniformity and equal treatment. It preserves the collective bargaining option, as Mr. Kelly has indicated. It allows individuals to be treated uniformly, to be treated fairly, and for the most part would result in a better morale among employees because of the certainty involved with the outcome of any disagreement between management and labor. Ladies and gentlemen, this is another step of best practices on our road to becoming first class, and I urge you to adopt it.
Mrs. Camacho.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Roberta Camacho, Precinct Number 4. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to Mr. Kelly. I don't understand, in the personnel bylaw, what I don't understand is, I understand that it has to be adopted by the union or noted and in the contract and so forth and non-union. What I'm not understanding is where in this personnel bylaw is there anything about evaluation of town employees? How that process is going to take place, and if it is going to take place?
Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Moderator, the Labor Board and the courts have decided that performance evaluations, both the format and the procedure, are a mandatory subject of bargaining and have to be dealt with in the collective bargaining process. So that's why they're not in here. They would be in the collective bargaining agreements.
All right, so...
And for the non-union personnel, they would then be developed and adopted as a policy by the Board of Selectmen. It's a procedural policy. It's not part of a bylaw.
All right, so if this is adopted tonight, how long would it take for the other half of the town? Now, all school department employees are evaluated. Different evaluation systems come into play different years, but they've always been rigorous evaluation systems. Some employees, even this year, have lost their jobs due to bad performance or poor performance evaluation systems, or not systems, but performance as evaluated by the system. My question then is, where is the equity for the other part of the town without the evaluation systems being put into place as soon as possible? And how long do you think that it will take to have evaluation systems put into place?
Well, I can't answer that for the unsettled contracts. For the two contracts that are settled, within the agreement, there is an agreement to develop an instrument and a process to make sure that all performance evaluations are done, and are done not personality-driven, but performance-driven.
But how long would that take? That's what I'm asking you. And will we discuss this?
I can't answer how long it's going to take to settle the other contracts.
All right, then let me ask this question, if you would permit it, Mr. Moderator. Are there going to be any I don't think you can probably answer this question, but I don't believe, I'll put my own beliefs out, I don't believe any more contracts should be settled in this town without all employees in the town being treated the same. And that is, employees that are not in the school department should have a yearly evaluation. That would then make everyone equal as far as evaluations go. And that is the only problem that I have with this bylaw, is that I understand about the union having to negotiate it, but I don't think that the union contract should be negotiated without a performance evaluation. And that's all I have to say about this. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the member, if you
Mr.
can
Kelly.
see, the two we have negotiated and settled include that provision.
Mr. Banas.
Good evening. Now, Peter Banas, Precinct 2. My main concern, when we look at what's going on here, it seems that we have settled contracts for 2, and we have no knowledge of anything for the other 5. And to me, this is, and I put this in my own words, it seems to me it gives a very serious feeling of mistrust with the selectmen, and I'm just curious if it would be okay to request a non-town member to speak that represents one of the other unions. Would that be an acceptable thing?
If the person is present,
Yes.
please come down, identify yourself, and the same rules apply.
Thank you. it seems like we're voting on this major thing to benefit the town, so we have cost control, makes a lot of sense. It just, perception is everything. In this, the way it's being done now, and the previous speaker just brought up the evaluation issue. There's a lot of questions, and I'm just concerned about the mistrust, the perception of mistrust.
Mr. Moderator, if I might, I'm going to ask you for the appropriateness of a union president to address this body about a negotiating point that is still on at the table when we really can't discuss it ourselves in open session without putting ourselves at risk. So I'll ask Town Council through you whether this is an appropriate forum for negotiations to be done at town meeting as opposed to at the bargaining unit table.
Mr. Riley.
I think that's a fair question.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, if this body votes, as it does for us to hear from other non-members, that they want to hear from someone who's not a non-member, I think that falls within the, the purview of this body. I do understand the administration's position therein, but I think it's up to the members to vote whether to hear from a non-member or not.
So generally, we have no...
Therefore, should this be a motion to allow a non-member to speak and have the town meeting members vote on it? Is that...
I will be, because we have no... Our charter allows anyone to speak before this meeting, whether they're a vote or not, just that they cannot vote. They have to follow the same rules, and if Mr. Curtin feels he can address this meeting without violating his procedures of, or any content of the contracts or negotiations, he's free to do that. I can't read his mind, and if there's a challenge to that, you understand that we're not being specific to any contracts. It's the principle of what the personnel bylaw does. Mr. Curtin?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for allowing me to speak before you. Thank you, annual town meeting. I won't go into any of the intricacies of our negotiations. I'm speaking basically on the articles. I'm speaking basically just on the articles. And as was mentioned earlier, which is the first time that I heard it, this came up in negotiations, we're still discussing it, and now it's come before annual town meeting. And now I've heard tonight that if you vote it down, the Board of Selectmen are just going to implement it. It's bullying. It's trying to cram something down at us. It's not fair. Yes, ma'am. Somebody did say it. Collective bargaining in the old way, we'd sit down with the town, we'd have a couple of pages of proposals, they'd have a couple of pages. Takes about 12 to 18 months. We usually go over the same items all the time, goes back and forth, and at the end, we come to you with an MOA, and you people agree to it, everything gets done. And sometimes there's a lapse in time between the time that the MOA gets transferred into the contract. But if you ask me, because I've sat out there with you, I'd rather look at a 2-page MOA that tells you exactly what you're giving, the union, non-union, whatever, than to have to sit there and try to sift through a 40-page contract and figure out what you're voting on. I've been a taxpayer here since '91. I've been a firefighter paramedic since 1997. I serve as chairperson for the Insurance Advisory Committee. I've been on that committee for 10 years. I've chaired it for 8. And I've been union president for the last 6 years. I've negotiated 3 contracts through collective bargaining, fair collective bargaining with the town, with 3 different town managers. Also, with the help of the Insurance Advisory Committee, we were also able to do changes to the health insurance last bargaining. This is the first significant changes to the health insurance in the town since they changed to HMOs from the old Blue Cross Blue Shield Master Medical. But we were able to do it. us working with you. Collective bargaining works. You don't have to cram stuff at us. You don't have to bully us. I have 3 kids. They all went through the school system. Like I said, I've been here since '91. I like this town. I'm not just here for me. I'm here for all of you. If this town fails, I fail. Now, the school committee stood up for their employees. There was a letter going around. I don't know if you saw it. Some did, some didn't. But in it, they stood up to their employees. They sent a letter to the Board of Selectmen saying, you can't push our employees around. And then all of a sudden, the school was dropped off of this article. They stood up for their employees. I appreciate that. They deserve a round of applause, and that's part of what we're asking you to do tonight, is stand up for the town employees. I'm not saying this bylaw is all bad. This bylaw has some merit. You have a lot of non-union employees that would gain a lot under this bylaw. But I represent one of 7 bargaining units in the town. I have a contract. Those are my benefits. I live and die by that contract. It's a contract that has been properly bargained, and it's been enforced by both sides. This bylaw does not help us at all. It hurts us. It actually complicates town meeting. The only other place I know that has this personnel bylaw is Sterling. If you go onto the Sterling website, it'll show you every year the personnel bylaw comes back to town meeting to be revised over and over and over again. It's been done since 2008. A personnel bylaw with the addition of 7 different contracts is nothing more than confusing and creates a nightmare, especially when things can constantly change, when things constantly come back and are changed, whether the selectmen change them or you change them. On the presentation, the idea that there was no max, according to the people that I talked to, all groups have a max. I'm at a max. I'm one of that 80% that the presentation made it look like I was being treated unfairly. I'm not being treated unfairly. I am where my contract says I should be, the contract that was fairly bargained between the town and IAFF Local 1512. There was another thing in there about super longevity. Super longevity isn't just given out to senior people. Super longevity was a retirement incentive. If you don't like the super longevity, that's fine. You know what you can do? Sit down with the collective bargaining unit and bargain it out. They did with us. Our super longevity is now gone. When they sit there and they tell you that retroactive raises cost you more, they don't cost you more. I get paid the same. The money that I get is based on the hours that I worked and based on whatever percentage I should have gotten that year. The problem comes in is when you try to fund it all in one year, when you try to fund 3 years' worth of raises all in 1 year. The Finance Committee the other night, they took that money, they put it aside, it's in the selectmen's account, reserved for collective bargaining. Leave it in there. When contracts get settled, the money is there. There's no huge hit, like a 3-year hit, trying to make that up all at once. The speaker earlier with the personnel bylaw, he seems to be picking and choosing items out of 7 different contracts to dramatize his efforts, and I disagree with him. Like I've said before, the MOAs, the reason that there were certain people who only had MOAs and didn't have the contracts were not back from the lawyers. Didn't change anything. Your contract stayed in force with whatever the changes were in the MOAs. Nobody was affected by it. When the changes were made, the new contract was signed, everything was fine. We're not all the same. All of us back there, we have different jobs, we have different responsibilities, we have different liabilities, we have different duties. But yet, when you turn around and you look at the matrix, he wants to put everybody in the same. He's saying everybody should be treated different, but yet everybody's going to go into this matrix and everybody's going to be treated the same. When you do this, right now, everybody's got their separate contract. If I wanted to go, I could go over to see Mr. Kelly. I could say, Mr. Kelly, can I get a copy of so-and-so's contract? I don't do it. Because when you start looking at everybody else's contract, you start comparing jobs, you start sitting there and it affects morale because you go, how come he's getting this and how come he's getting that? That's what happens when you throw everything into this matrix. Now, all of a sudden, people are fighting over, I should be making more than this one, I should be making more than that one, my job's more important than yours. Leave it the way it is. When he says that no employee will be harmed by this salary matrix, in trying to do this, you can't just, everybody's salary doesn't fit into it. So it winds up being a wide gamut of raises instead of a standard raise across the board for each employee. So I oppose his view. I'll tell you that some will be. The other thing is, tonight is the first time that we have ever heard the word redlined. I'm not too sure what that means, but I believe you're going to wind up capping people and not treating them fairly. If this is such a great thing, then how come there's 5 collective bargaining units that are fighting it right now? We urge you to vote this down. We urge you to let this be worked out at the collective bargaining between myself, Patrolman, Speyer, Thayer, and the DPW. I thank you very much for your time. I thank you for all the support that you've shown us in the past. God bless you.
Mr. Murphy.
Mr. Moderator, if I can just, I want to address 2 points before I forget what they were,
Yes.
if I might.
You may.
First of all, the statement wasn't made that this bylaw would be instituted or adopted as a policy. The explanation I gave was that the Board of Selectmen certainly had the right to adopt this as a policy. We chose to bring it to town meeting because we felt it gave a better comfort level to those that it would apply to, because it would not be just subject to a board that changes every single year. It would have to come back to a much larger body to vote on these changes. That's why we did bring it here. It was never said that it would be adopted. I said it could have been adopted. And as far as Sterling being the only town, I can tell you that Concord, Grafton, Hanover, Duxbury, Hingham, Holliston, Framingham, Milton, Sharon, Walpole, and Canton utilize a personnel bylaw to provide a structure to its labor relations. Thank you very much.
Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
My pleasure. Peter Murphy, Precinct 2, Municipal Operations Committee. Again, I mentioned that this was brought before our committee. Nobody showed up to oppose it, ask questions, or anything. Our group had a chance. Actually, I'm sorry, Ed DeFelice was there, I believe. Oh, that was the other one, I'm sorry. Anyways. Okay, thank you. And what happened was this came up in discussion. A couple of years ago, we talked about an HR guy, whether or not we need one or not. I believe the first time it got voted down. We have spent a lot of money in litigation over the years. We hired someone for HR. Now we have him, we want him to do a job. He has put together a package that will protect this town. Again, the rules are spelled out. When you come to work for this town, this is what you have to do. If there are issues, this is the procedures that you follow. It's very simple, very clear, very well spelled out. I kind of go back to Judge Judy. If it's not in writing, it don't count. Well, the union has their rules to go by. They have their shop stewards. They have their people speaking up for them. We didn't have anybody. It would go before the selectmen, it would go before the lawyers, it would get trashed around back and forth and all that. We got an HR guy. This gentleman here, he's a lawyer. We got one of the best. We're very fortunate to have this gentleman here. These articles, these policies here are no surprises. If you work for anybody, you have to go to work, show up on time, do your job, and behave yourself. You get paid at the end of the week. Your pay is fair. If you don't feel that the pay is fair, it's time to start looking for another job. I am going to support this. From the moment that I saw it, I was in favor of it. Again, we paid a lot of money over the years going back and forth, back and forth. We are now protected. Thank you.
Mr. Blacker.
Jeff Blacker, Precinct 2. I've been in the private sector for about 35 years, working for several different companies, and they all have some type of framework. They all have HR, they all have rules, just like we want to implement here. And they're there for a reason. It protects the employees, it does protect the company, of course, and this is really to protect us as well, from any type of litigation. You do something wrong, somebody's going to be suing you left and right. If you have rules in place that everybody has to follow, then it's less likely that somebody's going to come and say, hey, you did that to me, I'm going to go sue you left and right. I don't want to say a lot about this, but it's just, I don't even believe we're debating this so much. It's really very simplistic. If you have a job in the private sector and you have any reasonable amount of employees, your company's going to have something like this. It really should be implemented. I'm going to vote for it. Thank you.
Mr. Hanson.
Elliot Hanson, Precinct 1. One of the previous speakers was saying that it was very unfair to them, that side of the bargaining table. I think this agreement or this bylaw, really we're sitting down at a poker game here. And if the town is sitting down at the poker table, but they can't bring the cards, they're not even dealt the cards, so they have nothing for an opening gambit. With this bylaws, there is some measure of equality of power and justice, and to have a system in place that is fair and equitable rather than arbitrary and capricious is certainly a better system than it is now, where it's essentially haphazard. We, as a previous speaker said, we spend good money for a good person to come up with a good bylaw. I think we should accept this bylaw, and thank you.
Mr. Coleman?
Eric Coleman, Precinct 5. I'd like to move the question.
Yeah, he did. He came down. If you don't want to move the previous question, don't vote for it. All those in favor of moving the previous question, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. The motion carries. I declare that that's there. On the motion, no, I'm not going to read the entire 15 pages. We do want to go home. And that is to amend the town code by adopting the personnel bylaw as printed in the appendix of the Finance Committee report, pages 173 to 188. If this is not unanimous or the doubt mind the chair, I will take a standing count. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. There is doubt in the mind of the chair. All those in favor, please rise and the chairman take a count. Precinct 1 is 9. Precinct 2. Precinct 2 is 9. Precinct 3. 9. Precinct 3 is 9. Precinct 4. 11. Precinct 4 is 11. Precinct 5. Precinct 5 is 8. Precinct 6. 9. Precinct 6 is 9. Precinct 7. Precinct, how many? 10. Precinct 8. Precinct 8 is 2. All those opposed, please rise. Precinct 5? Okay. Precinct 1?
5.
Precinct 1 is 5. Precinct 2? 6. Precinct 2 is 6. Precinct 3? 5. Precinct 6 is, Precinct 3 is 5. Precinct 4? 7. Precinct 4 is 7. Precinct 5? 2. Precinct 5 is 2. Precinct 6? 5. Precinct 6 is 5. Precinct 7?
We have to change the votes to 10 yes, to 8 yes, and 7 no.
8 yes and 7 no. And precinct 8? 6. Precinct 8 is 6. The motion carries 66 to 43.
Thank you very much.
Now, somebody else has a timer going too. It's not mine. Good. On Article 15, ID 21. Once again, this is I need a motion to suspend the rules. And I'm going to recognize Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill, is the motion to suspend the rules so that we can act and vote on Article 15?
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules so that we can debate and vote on Article 15, ID 21.
If there's no doubt in the mind of the chair, we'll not take a standing count. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. I'm declaring it a vote unless somebody wants, 7 people want to stand up and challenge. It's voted. On Article 15, I'll ask the town manager to put this on.
Okay, I move to adopt the classification plan and compensation plan pursuant to the provisions of Mass General Law 41, Section 108A, as submitted to the town meeting on May 20th, 2013, date effective July 1st, 2013. This plan is to class either other than those filled by popular election or under control of the school committee into groups and classes doing substantially similar work or having substantially equal responsibilities, and to further establish a maximum and minimum salaries to be paid to employees in the positions so classified.
As a privilege of the chair, do you have another copy of that? That's what I'm looking for. Or is it on something that I...
You wrote this,
Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean I keep track of everything. All right.
Actually, no, I mean, it's...
Well, let the,
But it's, this is the same.
I'm going to make the, first of all, I'll let the town manager speak because he made the motion. I'll defer to the,
I'm going to defer to the HR manager.
Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Moderator, Article 15 creates a townwide job classification and compensation plan. The original plan was done to provide equity between positions and wages, like positions, to provide for a career path and or a career ladder in certain areas, and to make sure that the positions are comparable as far as pay goes to surrounding communities. I'll be glad to answer questions.
Mr. Cohen, you wanted to ask a question?
They need town meeting vote to implement this, or can they implement it anyway?
Good question. Mr. Kelly, if you want to respond to that?
Mr. Moderator, we're looking for town meeting to ratify this in the same idea as in the past article. It gives more control to town meeting and less control to political boards that change year to year. But as far as it can be implemented for the non-union personnel and for the 2 contracts that have been settled, because of the way those contracts were negotiated. I negotiated them in a particular manner, so they are part of the contracts.
Mr. Cohen, further questions?
I'll ask the question again.
Please use the microphone.
Do you need town meeting approval for this, or can the selectmen automatically put this in? I still haven't had an answer yet. Yes or no?
Good question. I still haven't got an answer.
Yes, is the answer.
They can do it anyway.
Yes, but if town meeting does it, it can't be changed at the whim of the Board of Selectmen, because it's by your vote.
Mr. Moderator, I am so confused at this now.
Well, it is my understanding, and he has presented this as a bylaw that will go in our record
For
books.
us anyway, so there's a joke here.
Is that correct, Mr. Kelly? That this would go in our record books with the personnel bylaw?
It would go in the code, Mr. Moderator.
All right, now, there's a couple parts I have a question on, being the chairman of the Town Code Review Committee. There are different parts of the Town Code book.
It would be attached to the personnel bylaw.
Would be, okay, that's my question.
General code usually puts it as the last item in the personnel bylaw. You and I have discussed how they do that in the past.
Yes. Any further discussion or question? Mr. Fallon?
James Fallon, Precinct 1, and I just want to know, it should have been asked on both questions, 15 and 14 articles, I should say, but I want to know if there are any changes in the conference, in the meetings that you have with the groups that have not decided on this yet. Are we going to get any notification of the changes, and we can still cast our votes on that?
In the contracts that have been settled,
I'm talking about the other one.
I can't comment on those.
But if you
in-
have any changes,
But if-
that's what I want to know. Excuse me, sir. I just want to know, on any changes, are we going to get the information on those before you grant them?
I cannot restrict the town as far as negotiation procedures go. However, as far as the 2 that are settled, the 2 that are settled reference the personnel bylaw by saying if the contract is specific and is not in accordance with the personnel bylaw, the contract trumps. If the contract is silent, then the personnel bylaw applies. That is state law. I can't answer your question because then I would be saying publicly to this body that I'm restricting the town's ability to negotiate.
Well, I just want to know, are we going to hear the ending of it before, or are we just saying that you're the boss and whatever you go?
Now, contracts, the funding of any contract has to come to this body.
All right.
The Board of Selectmen have to ratify any contract. The Board of Selectmen tell me where I have to go in negotiations.
That's what I was asking.
Mr. Scardino.
Joe Scardino, Precinct 1. This is the other half of equal protection. Once you have a set of laws, the other flip side is equal pay. And this provides for equal pay. I can tell you I was aware of at least one situation covered by the union where we had an individual that was in the position for 2 years, equal, doing pretty much the same tasks, paid $10 an hour. Somebody else was hired with no experience, given that a job was advertised at $15 an hour. This bylaw would prevent that by creating a structured pay scale based on skills, experience, and the other factors discussed by the Human Resource Director. I again urge your passage.
Any further questions? Since Mr. Cohen and no one else is up before you, go ahead. The 10-minute rule applies until, everybody gets one shot and you can't come back.
What bothers me here, I was the other half of that committee that had these articles, and we never had the chance to ask any questions on it. So they bypassed just what we talked about not doing, they did. And I agree with some of the union people out there, you can't compare a patrolman to a jackhammer. You can't control a paramedic to a plow driver. I'm a businessman, I'm not an attorney. I think we ought to sit down with you. He's talking about two unions, two minor unions. Anyone that's been in this town for years know when the police and fire settle their contract, everyone else falls in line. Usually it's the police or the firemen sign, everyone falls in line. It's been over the years tradition. I've been here a long time, I've watched this stuff happen. I just want to make sure, and what bothers me is, many years ago here, we used to have people that lived in this town as department heads. It was required unless the school committee or the Board of Selectmen approved it. I can only count one that's left. So when we negotiate these things, remember, you don't live in the town of Stoughton. We pay the bills. Just remember that. We're paying the bills. And I still resent that people don't live in this town. If you work for us, why don't you just use the town and pay the taxes? But just remember, the fire department are the key to this whole contracts. He can sit here and tell you anything he wants. I've been here for 35 years, and when the fire signs, everyone falls in line. So if they're going to hold out, and I agree, some of this stuff is out of control, but that's up, as the previous speaker said here, this is up to negotiations. We still have town employees here, and we still control the money here. I just want to make sure these people get a fair shake too. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator,
Kelly, do you want to?
placement on the grid is done.
Microphone.
Placement on the grid is data-driven and done scientifically. Any of you who have seen major corporations design salary schedules, it's designed on a Bennett method or a Hayes method or one of those scientific methods that assigns certain points to all of the different factors and then puts it into a logical, uniform grid. And that way, you value where the different positions are. It is not driven by what anybody individually thinks a position is worth. There is a scientific method to it. Points are assigned for each of the attributes of the job, and then you look at the grid and see where it fit, those points fit within the grid.
Mr. Crimmins?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Barry Crimmins, Precinct 4. A comment and a question. I'll just reiterate what I said on the previous article. I think this is putting the cart before the horse, but be that as it may, the question I have on the classification plan, this probably is a simple question, but I don't quite have the answer. Several of the positions are listed as exempt. Does that mean they are exempt from the classification plan? Because the positions are still listed on the handout, but they're listed in the third column. One is
Exempt
listed
means exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act.
from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Other than that, the classification plan applies to those positions?
We would have to otherwise list them with salaried items because they're management or salaried positions. So doing it this way, you can see where it fits in the grid, but it's an exempt position. It means that there is no overtime paid.
Okay, and a quick follow-up question, if I may, Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker. There's one position that's listed as confidential. Can you explain what that is?
Confidential positions are exempt as far as, well, because of their confidential nature from membership in the unions.
So I take it the position that's listed on the second page of the chart, category 6, is several different positions covering those various
We're
departments.
talking about the Board of Selectmen position.
I'm sorry?
We're talking about the Board of Selectmen position at this time.
Only that position?
At this time.
That's not what it says, but, all right, thank you.
Mr. Soros? Mrs. Hill?
Anita Hill, Precinct 2. I don't know about everybody here, but I work at a small company. We only have 25 people in the whole company. As part of my job, I handle a majority of the HR duties and payroll. One of the things with payroll is a wage scale, which is very much what we're talking about here. We have 25 different people and therefore 25 different positions. There's a wage scale for almost every different position. It's not just one scale. I think when we're hearing grid and one person gets the same as everybody, they're not all on the same scale. It's by position, by job description, based on a fair wage, and the data and the scientific study that he's talking about is what the market bears. There's many different ways to come up with a wage scale. This will have it on paper. I couldn't believe, number one, that we didn't have a handbook. I couldn't believe that we don't have a pay scale. If anyone has ever worked or ever worked with someone who's worked in HR, those are basics. We need the basics. Thank you.
Mr. Soros?
Joe Soares, Precinct 2. I'm for this. Please move the question.
One thing. That's out of order. You can't speak and then move the question, so somebody else will have to do that. Mr. Murphy?
Move the question.
Just want to know, protocol, it's cut off debate. And this is only to cut off debate. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Maybe cut off debate at 10:05. On the on the motion, which is to adopt the classification plan as described, and if I have any doubts, I will call for a standing count. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. There is doubts. All those in favor, please rise, and the chairman take a count. Precinct 1.
My selectman is AWOL, but I have 8 so far.
8. Okay, precinct 2. 9. Precinct 2, 9. Precinct 3. 11. Precinct 4. 12. Precinct 4 is 12. Precinct 5. Precinct 5 is 7. Precinct 6. Precinct 6 is 7. Precinct 7. Precinct 7 is 6. Precinct 8. Precinct 8 is 2. All those opposed, please rise. Precinct 1.
I have 5 against, and my selectman showed up, and he was for.
He already got his count. Precinct 2. Precinct 2 is 5. Precinct 3. Precinct 3 is 4. Precinct 4. Precinct 4 is 6. Precinct 5. Precinct 5 is 4. Precinct 6. Precinct 6 is 3. Precinct 7. Precinct 7 is 8. Precinct 8. 8 is 7. Again, the motion carries 63 to 42. Now, we have removed...
Mr. Moderator, I just thank you very much for your support on those 2 articles.
Now, you've asked... You've asked things to be moved around, so they are moved someplace. Article 62, I believe. Give me 1 second to move things.
Got a substitute motion.
Okay. Since Article 23 was removed to another time, and Article 33 was supposed to be asked after Article 23 only because of the time element. This was a request of Mr. Scardino from the Planning Board. This is Article 33.
We didn't table Article 23.
We had a substitute motion.
Oh, wait a minute, I stand
We only
corrected.
tabled 16 to 22.
Right.
All right, oh, okay. Let me go get the, I know. So you just put it back there so I can put it. Well, give me 1 second, I got it.
Yeah. Employees not in collective bargaining.
All right. Give me about 2 seconds here to... Yep, all right. This was... I got it. Oh, yeah, okay. I got a smaller version of it here. Thank you. Okay. Article 23. Since I'm going to allow that to come from the town manager. Yes, you do. You just took a count here. Just add the two numbers together. 63 to 42 is 105. Well, if you want me to make a quorum count, then the precinct chairman take the count.
I can.
So you write it down, and I'm gonna, you got, one is 12, yeah? Precinct 2? Precinct 3? Precinct 3 is 14, precinct 4? Precinct 17, precinct 5? Precinct 5 is 11, precinct 6? Precinct 6 is 10, precinct 7? Precinct 7 is 6, precinct 8? Precinct 8 is 7. There are 90 people present. That certainly is far beyond the necessary quorum. Are we ready to put the motion on the floor? Town manager, would you like to put Article 23?
I guess. This is the one, right, the substitute motion? Mr. Moderator, I move to raise and appropriate the sum of $71,949 to fund salary increases for those town employees not subject to collective bargaining agreements. And to meet this appropriation, the sum of $71,949 be transferred from FY 2014 budget Board of Selectmen account number 122, line 153, page 30.
Just one correction on this. Mr. Riley has pointed out, you don't have to use, remove raise and appropriate, because you're just transferring. Raise and appropriate means you put
And I
it on.
stand corrected, I would move to transfer the sum of
You still have to
$71,949.
appropriate the money, but you just can't use the raise.
Transfer and appropriate, you want me to reread this?
Yeah,
Set
just
it
to
rate?
appropriate the sum of $71,949, and then, that's all that you need.
Then strike raise and from my previous motion,
That's
thank
all.
you.
Well, this motion doesn't have that. It's the correct word.
On the article,
I read it.
any discussion? Mr. Ianzavino?
Is there any discussion?
Yeah, if you...
Not for me, I just made the motion, I'm happy with that.
All right. So there's no further questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I declare it carried.
Thank you very much.
Now I get all my paperwork messed around here. Now it says we'll do Article 33. Because there was a motion made, a request, and it was answered in our very first session to take Article 33 after Article 23. So we have just disposed of 23. So we're now on 33.
Take this one up tonight.
On the motion, I need someone to make the motion. Mr. Scardino.
Joe Scardino, Chairman of the Planning Board. You may recall there was a yellow piece of paper sent out, so I direct your attention to your portfolio of papers Easy to spot, it's yellow.
Good, I didn't get one.
Sorry we couldn't do it in green.
Can I have another, Mr. Scardino?
There was
Do you have another copy of that?
Noreen, we get some more of these?
As I'd like to remind all persons presenting or preparing motions to put them up here for distribution and to make absolutely certain
They were on the table 2 weeks ago.
which table. I requested all things to be put on this table and make sure that we receive them in the proper time.
Well, the chairs are distributing it. I'll read the substantive motion. To amend the zoning bylaws, Section 5, by adding after the existing subsection D, a new subsection entitled M, Temporary Moratorium on Medical Marijuana Treatment Centers. Purpose, by vote of at the state election on November 6, 2012, the voters of the Commonwealth approved a new law regarding the cultivation, distribution, possession, and use of marijuana for medical purposes. The law provides that it is effective January 1st, 2013, and the State Department of Public Health is required to issue regulations regarding implementation within 120 days of the effective date. Currently, under the zoning bylaw, a medical marijuana treatment center is not a permitted use in the town, and any regulations promulgated by the State Department of Public Health are expected to provide guidance to the town in regulating medical marijuana, including medical marijuana treatment centers. The regulation of medical marijuana raises novel and complex legal, planning, and public safety issues. The town needs time to study and consider the regulation of medical marijuana treatment centers and address such novel and complex issues as well, to address the potential impact of the state regulations on local zoning, and to undertake a planning process to consider amending the zoning bylaw regarding regulation of medical marijuana treatment centers and other uses related to medical marijuana. The town of Stoughton intends to adopt a temporary moratorium on the use of land and structures in the town for medical marijuana treatment centers, so as to allow the town of Stoughton sufficient time to engage in a planning process to address the effects of such structures and uses in the town, and to enact bylaws in a manner consistent with sound land use planning goals and objectives. Definition: medical marijuana treatment centers shall mean a not-for-profit entity as defined by Massachusetts law only, registered by the Department of Public Health, that acquires, cultivates, possesses, including development of related products such as food, tinctures, aerosols, oils, ointments, transfers, transports, sells, distributes, dispenses, or administers marijuana, including marijuana-related supplies or educational materials to qualifying patients or their personal caregivers. For the reasons set forth above, and notwithstanding any other provision of the zoning bylaw to the contrary, the town hereby adopts a temporary moratorium on the use of land or structures for a medical marijuana treatment center. The moratorium shall be in effect through June 30th, 2014. During the moratorium period, the town shall undertake a planning process to address the potential impacts of medical marijuana in the town, consider the Department of Public Health regs regarding medical marijuana treatment centers and related uses, and shall consider adopting new zoning bylaws to address the impact and operation of medical marijuana treatment centers and related uses. The reason for this stilted language is because we're using a template that's been pre-approved by the Attorney General's office. So by adoption by this body, we know that this will be the law until 2014, in which case we'll have plenty of time and opportunity to decide and conduct public hearings, decide what the town's position on this important legal issue. Thank you.
I heard the motion is second. I would just like to make a couple comments. Not on the merits, but on the procedures. First of all, this is within the scope of the original article that was put in the warrant. It says, very simple, we have to do something about a zoning bylaw. The situation is here that only the Attorney General can do something that normally this town meeting cannot do. One is we cannot refer by any motion of this town meeting to require something to be inserted in a future warrant. That is strictly the purview of the Board of Selectmen. However, the Attorney General can make special rules, and rather than they ask for exemptions. The other is, if every town goes through and does the usual thing, what you would do in a college exercise, you would go and borrow from every other town what they thought will work, and the basic issues still have to be addressed by the Attorney General, so they are going to create something that the town, that they will approve that meets the new statute, and at the same time allow the town then to get its act together, like where these districts and so on would be. So that's the second thing that it is. They had initially requested towns to either put this in the warrant. Our warrant had been closed long before this came up, and the moderator has to rule what things within the scope. And as far as I'm concerned, this is within the scope. It asked, the original article did ask for a bylaw addressing medical marijuana treatment centers, and the public hearings were made aware of this and notified accordingly, so there's no problems on that end. And other than that, if there are any other questions, I will allow Noreen O'Toole, since she did put this in. Are there any questions? Oh, I'm still not used to this, so Mr. Smith. I look out there now and I complain.
Paul Smith, Precinct 7. Paul Smith, Precinct 7. The state was caught with their pants down here because the voters voted overwhelmingly to approve medical marijuana in the state. So this is an attempt to limit the business part of this situation. What we're saying to these people is, no, you can't do it here. The state hasn't come up with any rules, and they're asking us to do their job for them. I don't think Stoughton should pass this. I think we should open up this town for the tax advantages of this medical marijuana. We have a perfect situation in town to invite these people in and do this for the state of Massachusetts. This is cobbled together. There is no rhyme or reason to it as far as the law is concerned. But they're saying you've got to pass it, or they want us to pass it because they can't do anything about it. I think we should start with the freedom that this town started with and not be subject to this system. I move that I hope that we won't pass this article.
Mrs. O'Toole.
Through the moderator, this particular bylaw being presented is just a moratorium. We're dealing with a moratorium in this case, not with an actual bylaw creating any sort of district. This is just to give the town a little time, a little planning time, to decide, towns are being asked to regulate the dispensing, the cultivation and the processing, distribution, storage, and the wholesale or retail sales, and the quantity allowed for a 60-day allowance of marijuana. This depicts just a few responsibilities that the town of Stoughton would be looking at. So what we're asking right now is, we're just asking for a year to do some planning to decide on which district would be feasible in order to create such a use. So all we're doing is taking just a year to do some planning on this. We're not disallowing this use. We're studying this use to see where it would be appropriate within the town.
Mr. Murphy.
Peter Murphy, Precinct 2. The question I have through you, Mr. Moderator, maybe to the town engineer or the engineering department, has anybody applied for any permit to proceed with this at this moment, right now?
Through the moderator, it's a Massachusetts Department of Public Health regulation. They have to go through the state, and they have to be approved as a nonprofit before they even can come to a town to seek a site for a dispensary. So that's at the state level. We will not see anyone until they've been approved with a license by the state.
So if someone had gone before the state yesterday and applied for it, and I'm not sure where it would fall into play, if they started the process before we put in this moratorium, were they allowed to still be able to come here? Because they started the process.
If they are approved as, they had a license, they're approved, you're saying if someone was already approved and they came into the office tomorrow and this hadn't been voted on? Is that what your question is?
Well, if they start the process, I'm not sure about the zoning. When you start a process, the date has started, say yesterday, and they were to get approved by the state, would they be allowed to come here 3 weeks from now, because they were approved 3 weeks from now from the state, and do whatever they want to do?
I think through the moderator, I'd refer that to town council.
Mr. Riley.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I understand the question. The Department of Public Health, which is the state agency that's going to be issuing these licenses, only very recently issued their own regulations. So first, I'd say realistically, I think it's going to be months before anyone gets one of those licenses. And if, I guess it depends on whether you could read the zoning bylaw in a way that would allow a use that's not mentioned to come in. But if town meeting were to vote this tonight, it would give a 1-year moratorium. Just for reference, there is a town that already tried by bylaw to ban these facilities, and the Attorney General rejected that. So you can regulate where they go and put conditions on it. You can't ban it outright. And this would just give a year, sort of a holding pattern to work on that.
So if passed tonight, this would actually become effective tomorrow morning?
Technically, it has to get approved by the Attorney General, although they have approved these already, but it does kind of relate back to tonight, yes.
Okay. The other question I have is, whatever we put together, would that go before the Municipal Regulations Board prior to next year's town meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to point out that what was brought to our attention and why it is necessary to put something in our bylaws is if, and the town planner can probably verify this, is that if we don't have anything on our books, we have no defense on whatever the town wants to do or dispose with. So it's a catch-22. We have to do something, but we don't know what to do.
Absolutely, and if you look at the handout, it's a temporary moratorium. And by next town meeting next year, we'll have a regular bylaw that you'll be looking at for dispensaries in marijuana treatment centers.
Mrs. Anzavino?
Barbara Ansavino, Precinct 4. I just have a quick question. If this is a temporary moratorium, and we have to have something in place by the time the moratorium ends up, and we have to have the bylaw written, and we have to have it go through the whole process and come before town meeting next year, and then town meeting has to close, and we have to wait 5 days before anything that we pass goes into effect. So are we going to have time? Are we going to have a special town meeting for this in order for us to be in a position to have it done by the date that the Attorney General says? Or are we going to have to call them and explain our problem?
No, we will have till next June. The temporary moratorium will still be in place. And we'll be coming to town meeting and looking at a proposed new bylaw. So we will have that cushion of protection.
So you think that this town meeting will be done in time for that law to come into effect?
Well,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I think if my article is placed on the beginning of the warrant, I could be okay with that.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to point out that several years ago, this town adopted a state statute that allows, when zoning articles are put into a warrant, that the town boards that are involved in issuing the permits must act accordingly, that as if that law has been passed. That was to stop what was known as the grandfathering process, where people tried to put things in a town meeting to stop something or do something before a town meeting did it. Now, we adopted that law, I believe, around 1988 or 89. So that gives us that little bit of protection during this time period. Mr. O'Regan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Bob O'Regan, Precinct 1. I just wanted to take a minute to connect some dots. The zoning bylaw states that a use not authorized by the zoning bylaw is not allowed in the town. We have a state law adopted by referendum that authorizes this medical marijuana use. This bylaw amendment gives us the moratorium within our bylaws to give us some protection within the time authorized by the state to do things right. So we can figure out where we want this use, if we do, under what circumstances and what approval process. So it's a good thing to do. It's proactive. And it's a good protective measure for us in case somebody wants to try to pick us off with a license. If we don't have something like this in place, we are exposed, even if we prevail, to the nuisance and expense of litigation, which we don't want to do. So strategically and financially, this is a good move to make. Thank you.
Mr. DeFelice.
I'd just like to ask the question on why this becomes a zoning issue. The question is medical marijuana. Why don't we just allow the pharmacies and the doctors to do what they would normally do? Doctors are going to be doing prescriptions, I assume. So why wouldn't you just keep the same process that we have now? So if you have a doctor's office in town, you know, that would be a spot, or if you had, you know, CVS or whatever. Why, I don't understand why we have to go through a zoning issue for a medical process that we have doctors and pharmacies already in place. I don't understand why there has to be a zone for it.
Through the moderator?
Yes.
The dispensing of medical marijuana in the treatment plans is just not the dispensing of just marijuana itself. There are other products that will be dispensed, such as candy bars that would have marijuana in them, brownies that would have marijuana in them, drinks. There are a lot of products that are being produced.
But that's done at concerts, right?
So that I think that the controls will be a little different than if it was sold out of just a retail business. I think, you know, we need that year to study this process, to see exactly what types of products will be sold, what types of signage as far as where it's located. So many feet away from, you know, gathering places for children. It's very different from any other retail use that we currently have in the town of Stoughton.
So are you saying that doctors may prescribe brownies as a medical?
I don't know how they'll
I don't
go.
understand.
I don't know how they'll go about that process, but that will be part of the packaging. And we're still learning about that packaging and how they will sell that.
Yeah. Sounds like this has got a lot more to do than medical marijuana.
I think
I mean,
we'll find out.
just about every medicine that we take comes from some plant or herb, and we consume it in a pill form. So I don't understand why this particular medication would be different from any medication that we currently take.
I think perhaps if anyone would like to come in the office and we can go through what happens when someone sets up a dispensary and what types of products that they can sell and grow within that facility, growing the plants. There's a lot to this bylaw. There's a lot to the law that the Mass Department of Public Health, and it is online if anyone would like to read it, because it has gone through the draft stage. It's a final law now. So if you just go to the website for the Massachusetts Public Health, you can read the entire law and see the different types of products that will be offered.
Does the law allow you to grow your own?
Without going into the whole thing, you go to a doctor and you're issued a card. And yes, in special hardship cases, you will be allowed to grow marijuana in your home.
And that's in any zone?
Excuse me?
That'll be in any zone?
Wherever your home is, yes.
So why are we worried about what zone these places are going to go in?
It's a different issue. You need to come in the office and talk to me.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Linehan.
All right, I see this as a no-brainer and move the question.
You have to cut off debate. All those in favor of cutting off debate, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, the motion carries to cut off debate. As this is a zoning bylaw, I'm going to recommend that we take a standing count so that there's no doubt in anybody's mind where this town meeting stands. All those in favor, please rise. Chairman, take a count. Precinct 1. Precinct 1 is 10. Precinct 2. Precinct 2 is 9. Precinct 3. Precinct 3 is 13. Precinct 4. How many? 15. Precinct 5. Precinct 5 is 9. Precinct 6. Precinct 6 is 10. Precinct 7. Precinct 7 is 5. Precinct 8. 7. All those opposed, please rise. Precinct 1. Precinct 1 is 0. Precinct 2. Precinct 2 is 0. Precinct 3. Precinct 3 is 0. Precinct 4. Precinct 4 is 0. Precinct 5. Precinct 5 is 1. Precinct 6. Precinct 6 is 0. Precinct 7. Precinct 7 is 1. Precinct 8. Precinct 8 is 0. Right now, it's still 78, I believe. It is 78 to 2. The motion carries. Yes.
78-2. 78 to 2.
Till Monday. Yes. Yes, we did. It said that we would go to 10:45.
Suspend the rules.
Then we take 5 minutes to...
Right.
Precinct 2, please bring your attendance.
Good job, Joe.
One took over the line.
Tied up. Good, how you doing? You look like you got a question. Reorganize again next year. Well, later.